Keely, we're live. We got it all back up and running. We're about to go, okay?
Okay.
Get ready.
Yeah.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of our online viewers and giant screen theaters. Welcome to the Emerald Forest. I'm your host, Mike Irvin. We're going to be taking you on a very special venture. For World Oceans Day, we're going to be offering you a cinematic first, an opportunity for you to be the diver and go diving without getting wet. So we're here today off of Ogden Point Breakwater in beautiful British Columbia, Canada. We're going to be looking at some of the most spectacular kelp forests that reside off the breakwater here and that descend down. We're going to be looking into a lot of the different types of marine species that exist in this location. Something I want to also share is that we are in Lekwungen territory. This is an indigenous community that has resided in this area. They're part of the Coast Salish group, and they've actually been ocean stewards and lived in this area for thousands of years. I also want to take a moment to especially thank all of our supporters: Aqua Canada, Eagle Wing Whale Watching Tours, Ogden Point Dive Shop, IMAX Victoria, Royal BC Museum, and many others. Thank you guys so much, because this is now an opportunity for you to go diving. All right, so we're going to do a bit of a gear check. I need to make sure that everybody in the audience right now has their phone. Yes, your phone. Pull it out right now. This is an opportunity for you to be able to communicate with the divers. But make sure your ringers are off. It is very important. So the way that you can communicate with us is on Facebook, Fisheye Project, and also on Twitter, @Fisheye Project. Please hashtag live dive, and also, as you can see, I'm moving around a little bit, but also, if you can, please include your name, location, and the question. And then that way we can pass that all the way through to the diver. All right, so I think we're just about ready. How are you feeling so far, Keely?
I'm feeling pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing pretty good, just moving around on the boat at the moment. So I'm going to pass it over to you. Why don't you take them on an underwater safari?
Sounds fantastic. So I'm Keely, your diver. Joining me behind the camera is Rowan Dowling. Behind him we have Jeff Skinner. And I'm also here with Rupert Evans. And in just a few moments, we're going to head down. But it is important that you check in with your dive team and make sure that they're okay. So, how's everyone doing today? Alright, that was pretty good, but remember, this is a live dive, so we can communicate with one another. So let's try that again. How's everyone doing today?
Woohoo! We're doing really good.
Alright, fantastic. So I'm okay, you're okay, and I think that means that we're about ready to start making our way down towards the Emerald Forest and through the kelp that plays a giant role in our ocean's ecosystem. So you ready? Here we go. All right. Now you might notice it's a little murky here off of our coast. In British Columbia, around the kelp.
All right.
And we're just taking a moment to get adjusted to our surroundings.
So Keely, can you give us a little bit of an idea of what we might be looking at today?
absolutely. We're in pursuit of that emerald forest, that kelp. Now we're just going to start heading in this direction and take a look out for all that incredible kelp that provides home, food, and protection for so many animals.
Actually, Keely, I do have a question. I've got a question from Carter from Central Middle School at IMAX Victoria.
Oh,
And
hi.
the question is, have you ever seen a giant octopus in this area?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely giant Pacific octopus in this area. They're very common around kelp forests. Now, I haven't seen one in this area myself, but plenty of divers in this area have. And I really hope that we see one because they're one of my very favorite animals. And the kelp forest generally provides home for lots of animals like crabs. So we're going to see if we can find anything like that today. Now let's get towards that kelp. I think we're getting pretty close. All right.
Keely, I do have actually one more question.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Mike.
Question from Kristen from Central Middle School as well, actually, in IMAX Victoria. Have you ever come across a shark around here?
Oh, I have not. No, but divers certainly do come across Pacific spiny dogfish. They are about, probably about that big. But there was also an incredible sighting of a basking shark off of our coast about a couple of weeks ago. They are quite endangered and very hard to spot. I think it would be incredible if we spotted something like that. And every now and again, divers can come across ratfish, which are closely related to sharks, as well as sometimes some six-gill sharks or even seven-gill sharks, particularly in and around Hornby Island. They like to eat a lot of the animals that can be found in and around some of this kelp we're taking a look at right now. I wonder if we're going to find any sharks today. And let's see what we can spot. Again, it can be a bit tough because the kelp forest, it means a lot of animals live here, which also means it can be a little tough to spot things. Now let's take a look and see what we've got. Well, I do have a sea star in here. Might be a little bit hard for you to see. There we go. Now you might notice I call it a sea star. Some of you might know them as starfish, but they are certainly popular animals to be found in and around all this giant kelp. In fact, the world's largest or most giant species.
All right. I actually have another question from the surface.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Mike.
All right. So I have a question from Lainey from Rockland Heights. What is the biggest aquatic creature you have ever seen diving?
Whoa. Biggest aquatic creature. Well, other than a diver, one of the times when I was diving, we actually came across a group of spinner dolphins in British Polynesia in the South Pacific. That was definitely one of the larger animals to come across diving. And here in British Columbia, sometimes divers come across sea lions. And those, of course, can get pretty big as well. They like to forage in and around all this kelp. In fact, just before our dive here yesterday, I saw a nice big female stellar sea lion looking around for some food in and around these rocks. Now, let's see what we've got around this kelp. We've got a big group of kelp here with some moss animals on those leaves. Bryozoans that make it a little bit colorful. Those white bits. We've also got some snails on here as well.
Ooh. Actually, Keely, I have a question as well. What creates the shell? How do those species create their shell?
The species like the snail?
Yeah.
Well, the way I understand it is these animals that have shells and a sticky foot, you can see that sticky foot right there, these animals are in a larger group that are called mollusks. And mollusks have a part of their body called the mantle, and the mantle secretes the shell. It keeps them nice and safe from the animals that might want to eat them, the predators. And that giant Pacific octopus we were asked about earlier, believe it or not, that's related to snails. It's a mollusk as well. But instead of one sticky foot, it has 8.
I have another question from the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
A question from Joven from Saskatchewan. And it's, have you ever seen a humpback whale over here?
Absolutely, I've come across humpback whales in British Columbia. Now, of course, not while diving, and it's probably best that we keep them nice and safe and keep our distance. But sometimes we can spot them up and down our coastline. And luckily, based on sightings information that people have provided as citizen scientists, we know that humpback whales are starting to come closer and closer to our shorelines. It's probably because of that incredible kelp that we can come across over here, because that kelp provides the sort of feeding grounds for those animals to eat. Now, if we take a look, we have got a sea anemone here, as well as a swimming scallop just to the left. Now, this is a really pretty color. Sometimes people are surprised about just how colorful the animals here in British Columbia are. They really can look quite tropical with all the yellows and oranges.
All right. I just actually want to take this moment to encourage anybody who is online right now to don't be afraid to ask us any questions that you have. This is your opportunity to talk directly to the diver. So please do write in your question as your name, your location, and the question following it. We'd love to hear from some of the other sites that we have across Canada. That'd be fantastic, and I will put you over to the diver.
All right, yeah, absolutely, because we have here another giant in the kelp forest ecosystem. This is a California sea cucumber, and I'm really glad that we found one today, because it was this animal here that got me really interested in all these incredible animals found in the oceans. As spiky as it looks, actually really soft. Now, I don't want to show that off quite now because I don't want to disturb the sea cucumber, but these spikes, they're just for show, trying to make sure that they don't get eaten. But,
Keely?
yeah.
I actually just want to give you a bit of a heads up. We just saw a sea lion drop down over top of you.
Oh, really?
Yeah. You want to take a look around?
Yeah. Let's see.
Let's see if he's a little friendly.
All right. Well, based on the size, I didn't see it, but I'm inclined to think it's probably a female. But we'll take a look around. No sighting quite yet.
Well, we can continue for now, and then if it decides that it wants to come by and say hello, that'd be awesome.
We'll leave it up to the sea lion. We don't want to disturb it too much. But we're actually at about 36 feet right now. And if we start heading up a little bit, we might come across some other animals in the kelp. But here, I'll just point out this right here. This is a juvenile bull kelp. Bull kelp are the largest species of kelp. They can grow this right here. This size is about how much they can grow in a single day. They can grow to be even longer than killer whales. They grow up to be like rainforests underwater, providing that home at so many different levels in the ocean for all those animals, and it helps support those giant Pacific octopus and the big humpback whales, and yeah, maybe even the sea lion we could come across. But of course, the sea lion, it'll know where we are and decide whether or not to come visit.
Hey, Keely, actually, I have a good question on that note.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is from Hazel at IMAX Victoria. What happens if a diver gets attacked by a marine animal, especially, let's say, a sea lion?
Well, that's hard to say because it's going to depend on the animal and the species in question. I've heard about some cases of divers interacting with different sorts of animals. So it's really hard to say for certain. Most of the time when divers come across sea lions in British Columbia, it's the females who are just interested in checking things out. And they sometimes play around the divers and depart. I've also heard about giant Pacific octopus coming up and even coming on the heads of divers. Again, they're generally just pretty curious. A lot of times, if you're respectful around animals and you keep a good distance and not approach them too much, then they don't feel threatened. If you were to be in a situation where you came across them where another predator had just been there, or really it's difficult to say if they're protecting their young, things might get a little bit uncomfortable, but luckily, most divers are pretty respectful and it doesn't happen too terribly often.
I have another question, actually. This one is from Grayson from Saskatchewan. He's in IMAX Regina right now.
Hi.
Have you ever seen a pufferfish over in the waters here?
A pufferfish? Not quite. No, they're traditionally more found in tropical waters. They have those really... Some of them, of course, can get quite big and have those spines across them. So I gotta say, the thing that comes to mind for me, it might be kind of similar to pufferfish, and I might be a little, that's just in what's related to me, but I think of the rockfish. Rockfish make their homes around all this kelp. They're a very west coast fish, they'll settle right down into that kelp and stay in one spot. But they have spines on their dorsal fin, which can be venomous and try and discourage animals, like maybe that sea lion, from coming by and eating them. So that's what to me, seems closest to that pufferfish, but they like to be in warm spots, like, well, some of us like to as well.
Alright, well, actually on that, do you see any rockfish around you right now?
Not at the moment. We can try coming up a little bit. I see some tube snouts. I was just going to point out really quickly, we're talking about some of the giants that live in amongst this kelp. Take a look right here. This is the world's largest species of chitin. This is a gumboot chitin. I know it doesn't seem too much like an animal, but it is. And it's part of that mollusk family. It's got a sticky foot, and underneath that outer covering there, it's got 8 shells that sometimes wash up on our beaches. So, pretty big giant. But if we come up here, you might see some of this kelp and some tube snouts around the top of it. That kelp provides a nice sort of place to grow up. And so we might spot some rockfish around here. But we've also got a lot of these red sea cucumbers with their feeding trees, as it were, out seeing what they can filter from all this water around us, which is very productive, has lots of nutrients. Part of why we call it the Emerald Forest. But let's see if we can find some rockfish.
Keely, I have a question from the surface.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
This is a question from Becky, who is over in Ontario at Da Vinci Public School. Do you see any effects of pollution here?
Well, a lot of times pollutants in the water are not that obvious unless we test them. But I gotta say, one of the biggest things that I can visually see around this part of our oceans is some of the garbage that makes its way in and sometimes settles along the bottom around all these rocks and kelp. So even in the past few days, I've collected a lot of fishing lines and hooks that have become settled in these rocks. And of course, we definitely see some plastics and things that settle in this area as well. So that's what I'd say is visually one of the biggest problems that divers can see. Those pollutants is something that the scientists can spot a little bit better when they're testing the water. But it's definitely a concern in some area. Going back to those big giant Pacific octopus that I'm a pretty big fan of, we know that in some species of octopus, trace levels of mercury and other kind of things sometimes seem to lead to those octopuses not being as big as they once were. Definitely something we want to keep an eye out here in our oceans, because especially on a day like World Oceans Day, we find them pretty incredible. Well, speaking of that kelp though, it almost looks like we've got some eggs in here. There we go, we can see there's lots of different animals that make their home around the top of this kelp and along the bottom. Just like in a rainforest, you'll find different species like birds up top, different animals hanging out in the branches, and all kinds of bugs and things along the bottom. The same area where we found those chitons and things. Well, let's take a look around.
I have another question actually from Ontario.
Yeah, go ahead.
This is from Mrs. Sanderson. How do mussels move?
I gotta say, I haven't seen a lot of mussels moving around. Usually they stick onto surfaces, pilings, docks and things like that. If you visit a coastal area, you've probably come across some mussels. They attach by using a bezel thread. But one thing about those mussels is they have two shells. Now in the case of that scallop I showed you earlier, they can flap those shells open and close, kind of like this. Use some jet propulsion, sort of swim away. It's not something I've seen in mussels. They generally sort of float around like you see some of the particles in this water when they're pretty little, and will start to settle. I gotta say, I haven't seen a lot of mussels moving, so I'm not sure. That's a really great question. Maybe someone who's grown up some mussels would be able to answer that a bit better, but it certainly sounds like it would be a fun thing to do.
I have another question as well.
Yeah.
So, Chrissy from IMAX Regina would like to know, how long can you stay underwater?
Oh, that's a good question, Christy. Well, I gotta say, it depends a little bit on the diver and a little bit on your gear. Now, all of us, we have these air tanks on our back, and we just have regular air inside. Sometimes different mixtures mean you can stay down a bit longer, but it also depends on what you're doing. If you're doing a lot of swimming and if you're diving at deeper depths, you're going to use your air faster. If you stay a little bit shallower, swim a bit more controlled, you might a lot of times be able to stay underwater for close to an hour or so. Most divers spend about 45 minutes or so under the water. It's a good amount of time to take a look at a place like this emerald forest for some pretty incredible animals. So let's take a look and see what we might come across. Now we're pretty lucky to be able to move around in this area today because it is so incredibly productive. Provides home for a lot of those incredible animals, but it does a lot of important things for each of us as well. This big kelp you see looks to me like it's probably a sugar kelp. So called because, yeah, sometimes people eat it, and when it dries out, it can have sort of sugars right on the top. Now you might think of just kelp as something you use if you're eating sushi, but believe it or not, you find kelp in a lot of everyday products. Does anyone here brush their teeth today?
Well, I know I did.
Okay, perfect.
Keely, on that note, I did want to add two more things here.
Yeah.
So I have two questions that I'm actually going to kind of put together. It's a little bit about our equipment. So for one, how do we breathe? And I would like to add in how you communicate. This is from Jill at IMAX Victoria. And we also have another one is it cold? So, like, how do we deal with the temperature here? What kind of equipment are we using that allows us to do what we do in this environment?
Oh, yes. Well, we've got the air on our backs, absolutely. We've got these hoses connected to our masks that help us breathe. And, of course, we also have some hoses that connect to our dry suits here. And by pressing a little button right here, oh, there we go. I can add some air into my suit. And you know what? That bit of air helps keep me a bit warmer, which is definitely nice here in BC because the water here at these different depths can get a bit cold. So we wear lots of layers underneath here, and we're also lucky enough to work with Aqua, who have provided us some really nice warm undergarments. So, though I can tell it's a bit cool down here, I'm not feeling too cold right now because the combination of that air in our suits and the dry suits here help keep us warm. And, of course, the masks that we're wearing help us communicate and talk to each other. The Guardian systems are how we're able to talk right now. I hope that's pretty much answered the questions that you're looking for there.
Perfect. Actually, I'm going to have one more question for you here. Is Dylan from South Park Elementary. What are the most common animals you see?
The most common animals when we see diving, honestly, it kind of depends on where you dive. There's all kinds of different sorts of ecosystems around here. The kelp forests, sometimes the sandy grass beds, but it's pretty common to come across rockfish and tube snouts. But of course, the sea cucumbers, sea stars, and different chitin species are pretty common. Really, kind of also depends on the day, but that's what's so great about diving in BC, and especially diving in an area where there's a lot of kelp. There's so many animals that could be common. In fact, it's pretty lucky that we have that chance to do it with all of you here today. Get a closer look at those different kind of sea cucumbers and chitins, some of the different snails, and even the sea lion you saw up top there, Mike.
All right, Keely, we're going to do one more question, and then we're going to start to wrap up here.
Sure.
Sarah from Ontario would like to know, do snails leave their shells in the ocean?
Do the snails leave their shell in the ocean?
Yeah, how do they leave it? Do they shed it? Do they move on?
Well, most snails, they'll keep growing with their shell through their entire lives. And sometimes, of course, when they pass away, those snails might leave the shell behind, but that's actually very handy for other animals, like hermit crabs. They'll come into that shell and start to move it around and use it as their home. So most of the time, yeah, they're going to keep their shell their entire lives. But it's a good thing that they make such nice, strong shells to protect themselves, so other animals can utilize it as well. So we're pretty... So, of course, we sometimes do that with what we've come across in the ocean as well. That kelp we sometimes use in things like toothpaste and ice cream and chocolate milk. And it's pretty important to us. So, coming across this kelp and exploring it together today is a really fantastic way to get closer to our oceans on this World Oceans Day. So I'm really glad we could have everyone down here today. Mike?
Thank you very much.
Now, of course, I think you mentioned, Mike, that we're getting a little bit close to the end of our dive.
Yep, this is the end of our dive, so if you can wrap it up on your side, and then I'll take over from the top.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had a good time down here at depth, checking out the giant role this kelp plays in our ocean's ecosystems. Now, of course, you can continue learning about all these animals and role kelp plays by checking things out. But thank you for coming up with us. You were fantastic dive buddies. Thanks so much for your time and questions. On behalf of all of us down here, thanks again for joining us, and here's a good Goodbye. See ya.
Woohoo! All right, well, I just want to say thank you very much for everybody joining us today. We're definitely in a bit of a rocky water at the moment. We're having some fun. Thank you so much for joining us. I want to give a quick thank you and shout out again to our sponsors, Aqua in Canada, Ogden Point Breakwater, Dive Shop there. We've also got Stream of Consciousness. And thank you so much to everybody else who's been a part of this. We look forward to seeing you again. If you want to tune in at the 1 p.m. show, you can do that. We also have another dive that's going to be happening in September. So we just want to tell you a little bit about that. And it's going to be on the salmon run. So if you want to see wild salmon coming up the stream to spawn, that'll be your time to see it. So keep us tuned in on Facebook and Twitter. And we'll enjoy it next round. All right. See you later.
Bye-bye.